There was existence. There was language. Because there was a need for communication. Communication led to a script. Expression that was inherent had to have a medium. Various civilizations played a role in contributing to this journey of expression and communication. India played its part. We developed one of the oldest language, Sanskrit, which became the basis for many Aryan languages and which is also considered the mother of all higher languages. From these developed a vast landscape of media, stories, administrative texts, constitutions. The people's right to know became prominent. Media then took on its true sense and identity. People needed to express and people needed to know. We gave the world zero in 6th century AD. Media then took on its true sense and identity. People needed to express and people needed to know. The first newspaper is published in India in 1784. Free media, free country. This is the Newspaper Boy, a sight you will see only in India. Every morning on his bicycle, he distributes the news of the world to the Indian population. He is an artist, well trained in the art of launching each roll of newspaper accurately to the right doorstep. He even knows which home subscribes to which newspaper and takes no time to think before he pitches the paper in every direction. Every morning, India wakes up to this man delivering them with food for thought. After the editors have given the last story, the graphic designers done their bit. The paper is all black and white and color to be consumed along with a cup of tea or coffee as you prefer. Although the radio, television or internet have replaced the paper in some households, the newspaper is still a necessary addition to them all. The number of newspapers published in 2001 for various states of India. Delhi, 6,926. Maharashtra, 6,018. Madhya Pradesh, 3,555. West Bengal, 3,728. Rajasthan, 3,310. Tamil Nadu, 2,838. Karnataka, 2,556. Andhra Pradesh, 2,398. Gujarat, 2,257. Kerala, 1,854. Bihar, 1,513. Punjab, 1,204. Haryana, 1,036. The total number of registered newspapers as on 31st March 2004 are 58,469. India is a country with diversity. Its diversity is its richness and also its need to reach out in so many different languages and cultures. The competition is neck and neck. For every region there are adversaries, and since the privatization of electronic media, radio and television, channels have sprung up like mushrooms all over the country. There is opportunity here, and foreign channels are still tapping this uncharted territory recently opened up for business. In colonial times, India was struggling for its independence. There was a need to reach out to the masses and ask for their support. Support in any way. by joining the movement or sheltering the freedom fighters and their paraphernalia. This was a dangerous request, since many had lost their lives doing this.
There's a huge heritage which we inherited in 47, and the beginning of that heritage really was in the early part of the 19th century. This is where the first newspapers in Indian languages began. In fact, the very first ones were started by Baptist missionaries, again in Bengal. But then you had subsequently the father of Indian reform, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who began a newspaper in English, another one in Bengali, and a third one in Persian.
In 1821, Raja Ram Mohan Roy published his first Bengali newspaper, Sambad Kaumudi, which talked about social reforms. By the end of the 1870s, there were 100 newspapers in India. In 1881, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who was a journalist in Pune, started his weekly newspapers Kesari in Marathi and Maharatta in English. His newspapers were the medium to disseminate his nationalist ideals.
We then move on further down in the 19th century. You have newspapers emerging in all parts of the country, in the four metropolitan cities to begin with. But you also had newspapers in the smaller towns and in many Indian languages.
Gopal Krishna Gokhale also started a daily newspaper called Gyan Prakash, which allowed him to voice his reformist views on politics and society. He wrote about everyday problems, often criticizing the British rulers. At a young age of 21, Sri Aurobindo wrote enlightening articles in Hindu Prakash in 1893 to stop the Indian National Congress from deviating and focus itself to its clear-cut goal of national freedom.
These were newspapers which emerged as the mouthpieces of anti-colonial struggle. But alongside, you of course had newspapers which were mouthpieces for British rule and Anglo-British interests.
The various political actions initiated by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, like Swadesh, boycott of English goods, his program of non-violent cooperation with the British, and the power of the press for social and political reformation of the society, was later adopted by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Reuters was a British company, and there was plenty of British interest in India. One of the first things that we had to report in India was India's first war of independence, or the Indian Mutiny as we still call it in Britain.
I don't know of too many countries where the leaders of a freedom movement wrote so extensively and so well and with such depth of commitment. And if I were to say, you had Jawaharlal Nehru associated with the National Herald, you had Abdul Kalam Azad, who ran several publications, but to my mind, absolutely the finest of the lot in terms of the quality of writing, in terms of a certain vision of both journalism and India, was Mahatma Gandhi.
Print was the first form of media, but the audio format followed in early 20th century when war necessitated audio contact over long distance. It was done on short waves. This then came into common usage as man gaped at this speaking box when it came into being after the First World War in Pittsburgh, USA. Radio in India started rolling by the name of Indian Broadcasting Company on 23rd July 1927. After a few years, it was known as the Indian State Broadcasting Service. And finally, All India Radio, or AIR. The name synonym to radio in our country was coined in 1936 by the then Viceroy, Lord Linlithgow and Lionel Fielden, the first controller of broadcasting in India. On the eve of independence, 1947, All India Radio had only 6 stations located at Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, Lucknow and Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, and 4 stations in the princely states of Mysore, Travancore, Hyderabad and Aurangabad. In 1947, there were just 10 radio stations and 0.2 million receivers for a population exceeding 325 million. The government expenditure on radio kept on increasing. The older generation would fondly recall how they sat down as a family group to listen to the news in English and in Hindi. The first Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Sardar Patel, who was also the Deputy Prime Minister of the country, used to listen to the 9 p.m. news regularly before going to bed.
Here was a medium that was offering entertainment at a very simple level. People suddenly realizing that it's wonderful to have an instrument that is giving you news, and that's giving you theatre, and that's giving you music. And I think this is where the vibrancy was happening.
Independence came to India on August 15, 1947.
Even at the time of the Constitution, we had a constitutional guarantee for freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Curiously, freedom of the press is not mentioned in the Constitution. But the Supreme Court, right from 1950, has held that the freedom of the press is implicit in the guarantee of free speech. So freedom of the press has been constitutionally guaranteed by judicial interpretation. It's a constitutionally guaranteed fundamental right.
In 47, there had to be a shift, and it had to be a sudden shift, and there was a sea change that had come about, because abruptly the focus had shifted from colonial rule to democracy. And when we say democracy, it meant dealing with a completely different political idiom. And the Indian press did that fairly quickly, partly because India was not completely new to elections. Elections had taken place earlier. But elections on the kind of scale that took place in 1952, first general elections, unheard of anywhere in the world. Poor country, huge numbers of parties, a free press, and this is where I think the kind of press which evolved in India over the next nearly 30 years, I think you ought to read that into it.
In 1959, when Philips gave an offer to the Government of India for a transmitter at a reduced rate, the government approved, with the aim of employing it on an experimental basis to train personnel and to discover how television in India could be used as a medium to inform and educate its people in community development and formal education. At first, programs were beamed twice a week, each of 20 minutes duration. As the number of literates to illiterates was very small, television presented a very effective method to educate the population at large. Entertainment and education programs were introduced from August 1965, in addition to social education programs, the sole reason for the introduction of television in India.
We came to India in the late 60s. We've been here ever since. We started very small with Mark Tully.
While the electronic media was hatching and taking wings, the Press Council of India was formed on 4th July 1966. The government felt the need for an autonomous, statutory, quasi-judicial body. Justice J.R. Mudholkar, then a judge of the Supreme Court, became its first chairman. The Press Council Act 1965 was passed to help newspapers to maintain their independence, build up a code of conduct and a code of ethics for the profession.
The greatest safeguard is not merely the constitutional guarantee, not what's written in the Constitution, but is our independent judiciary, which has always come to the aid of the press, always defended the press whenever there are onslaughts by the executive in matter of newsprint policy or many other things, and that has made our press freedom a living reality.
I think we are very well protected. It is well guaranteed. On every major occasion, the courts have ruled in favor of freedom of the press. Very rarely has the press lost in legal battles when it has challenged something.
Apart from becoming big in the news arena, All India Radio also began focusing on providing entertainment to the masses. They moved from traditional programming like classical music to pop music and youth culture. This metamorphosis was the result of competition and the changing times. Vivid Bharati, a competitor to Radio Ceylon, was introduced in October 1957 as a commercial channel in India. Several programs apart from Hindi film music were introduced to hook the listeners like Yuvvani. This channel was targeted to the youth. Vivid Bharati went on air on July 23, 1969 in New Delhi.
Programming material became lighter, easier, more consumer friendly. Film music came in a very big way and offered an option to listeners, and that's why Vivid Bharati just went absolutely, within a few years of its being established, it became such an amazingly popular program.
पहली बार हॉकी की कमेंट्री जब टोक्यो ओलंपिक को 1964 में हिंदी में कवर करने का निर्णय किया ऑल इंडिया रेडियो ने, उस समय से हिंदी अंग्रेज़ी दोनों में कमेंट्री। तो पहले तो इसको रिकॉर्ड करके किया जाता था, लेकिन बाद में जब हॉकी में फाइनल में पाकिस्तान और भारत दोनों पहुँचे तो 64 में ये कमेंट्री लाइव की गई।
By 1970, Krishi Darshan for farmers was telecast in 80 villages. The number of television sets, all imported in 1970, stood at around 22,000, excluding the community sets. By the mid-70s, Indian sets were in the market and the number went up to 100,000. Television was gaining its popularity nationwide, and the figures speak for that. In the same decade, Delhi and the neighboring states had 200,000 television sets. The Bombay Centre was opened in 1972, and in the following year, television centres began operating in Srinagar, Amritsar and Pune, only relay centres. In 1975, Calcutta, Madras and Lucknow were put on the television map of India. In 1976, All India Radio was separated from television. Television now became an independent unit in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting under the new banner Doordarshan. In 1977, terrestrial transmitters were put at Jaipur, Hyderabad, Raipur, Gulmarg, Sambhalpur and Muzaffarpur to extend television coverage to a population of more than 100 million. Meanwhile, the success of the satellite instructional television experiment, SITE, brought India international prestige. SITE was launched in August 1975 in collaboration with National Aeronautical Space Association, NASA, ITU, UNDP and Ford Aerospace. India was now ready for satellite television. This project, one of the largest techno-social experiments in human communication, was commissioned for the villagers and their primary school-going children of selected 2,330 villages in 6 states of India: Rajasthan, Karnataka, Orissa, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh.
I was lucky to be part of both radio and television at that time, and it was a very linear kind of format, as you can imagine, because the national channel catered to everything in those days. It catered to news, sports, entertainment, films. Everything was on that one channel, and it still is. I mean, the terrestrial channel still caters to a large population which cannot access satellite channels, and therefore it has something of everything in it.
The main objective of this experiment was to study the process of existing rural communications, the role of television as a new medium of education, and the process of change brought about by the community television in the rural structure. Foreign policy allowed foreign correspondents to come and report from India. BBC was one of the first to come with its radio correspondence. Other media agencies followed suit.
When I came here, the BBC was treated really very well. Reporters had a lot of freedom, as they still do now. The government was on the whole helpful.
But there is a high regard for the Fourth Estate and the media here in India. Generally, I would say that politicians and authorities are ready to speak to journalists, very open. And one of the things that struck me when I first came here was the readiness of people in positions of power, government ministers and so on, to give journalists their home telephone numbers, and nowadays it's mobile numbers. You don't necessarily find that in other places in the world.
There is a club that brings these foreign media correspondents together in New Delhi and Mumbai, the Foreign Correspondence Club. It is an exclusive club of foreign correspondents based in India and covering the South Asian region. It was founded way back in 1958, and now the club has grown to become a vibrant hub of foreign journalists from all across the world.
The Foreign Correspondence Club was founded by a group of foreign correspondents based here in New Delhi and covering the region in 1958. It moved to its current premises here in Mathura Road in 1991, and interestingly, it was the Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who at that time was the finance minister, who helped the FCC procure this government building, which it rents and for which it pays a commercial rent. And there are now somewhere between 400 and 500 members, not just foreign correspondents any longer, but also many Indian journalists.
In many ways, the media in India is very free. There is a lot of debate, there's a lot of criticism which is allowed.
As the television industry grew, it got its necessary boost in the 80s when Doordarshan introduced color television during the 1982 Asian Games. In the late 1990s, All India Radio comprised a countrywide network of 219 centers, including 32 Vivid Bharati commercial centers, 73 local radio stations and 114 regional stations. Today, All India Radio broadcasts in 24 languages and 146 dialects for domestic audiences.
लेकिन रेडियो और टीवी ऐसी चीज़ है, जब लाइव टेलीकास्ट या ब्रॉडकास्ट होता है तो आपके घरों में आके बोलता है, इसलिए उसको हम उस समय सुनते हैं जबकि चीज़ हो रही है.
Things are going really well within the team as well. We've built up a really good vibe.
News and entertainment was the name of the game. There was a huge opportunity with the technology to support visionaries to bring this entertainment to the masses. There was no turning back from television. The early 90s saw the satellite television revolution. Although radio had preceded the television in the chronology of media in our country, satellite television saw the privatization of television channels in India.
We didn't have auto cues in those days, so you read from pieces of paper stuck on pieces of cardboard in front of you, and you moved the pages around. And you had a very formal kind of style of reading. But gradually, as the auto cue came in, one had to learn to relax a little bit and look more natural, as if one was just talking. And then the concept of anchoring, where you are not necessarily reading from a prepared script, but also improvising in between, doing live interviews, that started happening later.
Many new players were now in the market. Foreign channels like the BBC, CNN, followed by Star Television, also came into India with equal opportunity to a large audience.
In recent years we've grown a lot, and that's because of the media changing. We started in radio, we've grown into television, now we're doing online. We have language services in Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, Tamil. So we're quite big, and we've been growing exponentially as the demand for more news about India from Indians outside of the country, from other people outside the country and from Indians inside the country has grown. Media is as good as anywhere in the world.
A statutory autonomous body, Prasar Bharati, was established under the Prasar Bharati Act. The board came into existence from November 23, 1997. Prasar Bharati then became the public service broadcaster of the country. It continues to work through All India Radio and Doordarshan, which earlier were working as independent media units under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. FM radio also became privatized in the late 1990s, and now a large number of radio channels are on the waves for people to have a multitude of options as they travel in their cars, sow seeds in the fields or work at home. Today there are more than 210 radio stations with 111 million radio receivers in a country of 1 billion, covering 90% of India and reaching 98% of the population.
You're biased and you're not credible. Nobody's going to watch you, nobody's going to read you. Only that segment is going to read you who subscribe to your views. So in the end, it's going to be counterproductive. So I think it's good business sense to be impartial. And I think the fact that the media is allowed to exist in this country and the freedom it has is one of the greatest pillars of our democracy. The media in India is by and large is not partisan to that effect. That is, you can't say that Times of India belongs to so-and-so or India Today belongs to so-and-so.
There are 50 channels that provide coverage 24 hours a day. There are 14 private news channels, 17 English channels, 24 Hindi entertainment channels, 8 Tamil channels, 5 Telugu channels, 6 Bengali channels, 9 Malayalam channels, 3 Marathi, Kannada, Punjabi channels and 11 other channels.
I think the future of media in India is extremely bright. The media market is growing extremely fast. There's a lot of new TV channels coming out at the moment, and Reuters is indeed a partner in one of those TV channels. I think there's a lot of room for expansion.
The internet boom in the late 1990s brought information, news and entertainment to the office, home and public cyber cafes. Everyone wanted to know something and they had it at their fingertips. Media houses were now forced to have websites along with newspapers and television channels and radio channels to be ahead in the game. Sports, film, television programs, radio programs are now all on the internet.
I think it's very important for media to be a watchdog and become a facilitator of change and continue the pressure to enable government or policymakers or decision makers to get active in its responsibility.
Both in newspapers and in television, Hindi and other Indian languages are a very major force indeed, and I think that's very much a force for the good.
There are several regional newspapers that take the lead in their respective areas, like Lokmat in Maharashtra, with a readership topping to 8,820,000, Rajasthan Patrika in Rajasthan with a readership of 8,384,000, Dainik Jagran in Uttar Pradesh, readership going to 13,093,000 in 2005. Anand Bazar Patrika, a traditional leader in West Bengal with the majority readership of 6,933,000 in 2005. There are also other players like Bortoman, Shambad Protadin, Ganoshakti and Shunondo operating successfully in West Bengal. In Andhra Pradesh, Inadu is the clear leader with a readership of 11,119,000 in National Readership Survey 2005. Vartha, Swati Sapri Varapat, Andhra Jyoti and Deccan Chronicle are also major players of media in southern India. In the West, the market is led by Gujarat Samachar, which had up to 5,909,000 subscribers in 2005, followed by new entrant Divya Bhaskar Sandesh Publication and Chitralekha.
The future of media in India is fantastic. It's one of the most fastest growing fields here. So the media is going to grow enormously in India, both in terms of size and depth, and in different languages. So it's really a very good time to be in the media, and as an industry, it's got a great future.
The future of media is looking pretty good. It's a very vibrant sector. I believe there are something like close to 300 television stations now. I think it's the second biggest television market in the world after the United States. It's probably the only country, or one of the only countries in the world, where newspaper readership is actually growing. There are quite a few media.coms coming up that have had quite a large impact significantly in India, and I would say more so than in many other countries in Europe.
Things will settle down. I mean, inevitably radio will come. I mean, we're seeing now kind of the press being very worried about television coming and taking away their revenue, but it all happened in cycles. It'll go up and it'll go down. But 10, 15 years from now, I think there'll be radio news, there'll be television news, there'll be online news. It'll be in the hands of 10, 15 different organisations rather than the dozens that there are at the moment, and the quality will be better.
There must be around 300 foreign journalists posted in India, the bulk based in Delhi, another 100 or so others who frequent India on their beat. Our media on the whole is a valuable national asset which we can be proud of, and now it is going to get bigger and hopefully better. Subhash Agrawal, expressindia.com. As the newspaper, television and radio boom rages in India on the back of increasing consumerism and rising literacy levels, a raft of other overseas investors are firming up plans to get a slice of the action. Sumit Chatterjee, Times of India. Faced with slowing sales and dipping profits, foreign media houses are increasingly eyeing India, one of the most attractive markets globally. IndiaDaily.com. The growth potential is huge and we have not been able to tap a large part of it. The government policies are now very conducive to invest in this country. N. Bhaskar Rao, Chairman, Center for Media Studies. People began to wonder what would happen to the old-fashioned newspaper with a cup of tea in the morning. But what do we know? It is still a beloved of the Indians in all languages.
Television gives very little time, an in-depth coverage on issues like that. So print will continue to have a role, and things that are not covered on television will be covered in print. Background analysis, role of columns. But television certainly puts pressure because they are everywhere. It has a huge reach. But both have, I think, plenty of space in India as long as you preserve this diversity, this pluralism, many voices. As long as the Indian language press continues to grow from a fairly low base, if your base becomes more developed, your growth rates will slow down. I think the future is bright, and it is in striking contrast to what you see in developed countries where they are all in depression.
Halfway point in the one-day international series between India and South Africa. It's time for match number 3 at day-night affair from Chennai. But a quick look back will indicate that the Indians were brought down.
There are channels on their way to being on air. There are more radio channels to be launched and more websites to reach out to the Indians and international community alike. We are a free media and a free country.